The fork clattered against my mother's plate as those words left her mouth, cutting through the Sunday dinner conversation. Like a blade through silk. I stared across the mahogany dining table, the same one where I'd eaten countless childhood meals, where I'd announced my high school graduation, where I'd shared news of my first business client. My parents had just finished praising Jason's latest promotion at his law firm, when Dad turned to me with that familiar look of disappointment etched across his weathered face. Mom nodded in agreement, her voice dripping with certainty when she declared I'd never measure up to my older brother's success. Something inside me finally snapped after 28 years of living in Jason's shadow, and the words tumbled out before I could stop them. The silence that followed my declaration felt heavier than the humid August air seeping through the windows of our family home in suburban Columbus, Ohio. My mother's fork remained suspended halfway to her mouth, loaded with the pot roast she'd spent all afternoon preparing. Her brown eyes, usually warm and inviting, now reflected nothing but genuine confusion. "What money, Brantley?" she repeated slowly, setting down her utensil with deliberate care. "We've never received a single dollar from you." The room seemed to tilt sideways as her words registered. For the past 3 years, I'd been religiously transferring $800 every month from my business account to what I believed was their mortgage payment fund. The automatic transfer happened on the 15th of each month without fail, even during lean months when I had to eat ramen noodles for dinner. "That's impossible," I stammered, pulling out my phone with trembling fingers. "I've been sending you money since I turned 25. Look, I can show you the bank statements." Dad leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he examined my screen. The color drained from his face as he scrolled through transaction after transaction, each one labeled family support, mortgage assistance. "Son, I don't understand this," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "We haven't received any of these payments. Our mortgage is 3 months behind, and we've been considering selling the house." My stomach lurched as the implications hit me like a freight train. $28,800. Gone. Vanished into thin air, or more accurately, into someone else's pocket. The room spun as I tried to process this information, while Jason sat unusually quiet at the other end of the table, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something that looked suspiciously like guilt. "Jason," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper, "you knew about the money troubles, didn't you?" My older brother shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the leather creaking under his expensive suit. "Look, Brantley, I've been helping out where I can, but lawyer salaries aren't what people think they are, especially when you're paying off student loans." Something about his tone felt wrong, too defensive, too rehearsed. I'd grown up listening to Jason talk his way out of trouble, and every instinct in my body screamed that he was hiding something significant. "We need to call the bank," I announced, standing up so quickly that my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Someone's been stealing my payments, and we're going to find out who." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of phone calls, account numbers, and increasingly frustrated bank representatives. Finally, we reached someone in the fraud department who could trace the transactions. What we discovered made my blood run cold. The account receiving my transfers belonged to someone named Jay Montgomery, with an address that seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place. When the representative read the full address aloud, my mother gasped audibly. "That's Jason's apartment building," she whispered, her face pale as moonlight. The drive to Jason's apartment complex felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my Honda Civic so tightly that my knuckles turned white, while Mom sat in the passenger seat clutching a manila folder filled with the bank documentation we'd hastily printed. Dad had stayed behind, claiming he needed time to process everything, but I suspected he couldn't bear to witness what we might discover. Jason's building was one of those modern glass and steel structures that screamed expensive rent. The lobby featured polished marble floors and abstract artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. I'd always wondered how my brother afforded such luxury on a junior associate's salary, especially with his mountain of law school debt. We rode the elevator to the 14th floor in complete silence, the only sound being the soft hum of the machinery and my mother's occasional sniffles. When the doors opened, we walked down the carpeted hallway until we reached apartment 1412. I knocked firmly, the sound echoing off the walls. After several minutes, Jason opened the door wearing a silk bathrobe and holding a crystal tumbler filled with what looked like expensive whiskey. His face went through a spectrum of emotions when he saw us standing there: surprise, confusion, and finally resignation. "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the spacious living room. The apartment was even more luxurious than I'd imagined, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, leather furniture that belonged in a magazine, and an entertainment system that must have cost thousands of dollars. "Nice place," Mom said quietly, her voice carrying a note of suspicion I'd never heard before. "How exactly do you afford all this on your salary?" Jason set down his drink and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Look, I can explain everything. It's not what you think." "Really?" I pulled out the bank statements and spread them across his glass coffee table. "Because what I think is that someone named Jay Montgomery has been receiving money meant for our parents' mortgage. Someone who just happens to live at this exact address." The color drained from Jason's face as he stared down at the evidence. For a moment, I thought he might deny everything, spin another one of his elaborate tales that had gotten him out of trouble throughout our childhood. Instead, he collapsed into his leather armchair and buried his face in his hands. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered, his voice muffled by his palms. The pressure, the expectations, the constant need to be perfect. Do you have any idea what it's like being the golden child, everyone expecting you to succeed at everything? "So you stole from me," I demanded, my voice rising with each word. "You let our parents struggle while you lived in luxury with my money." "It wasn't supposed to go on this long," Jason said, finally looking up with tears in his eyes. "It started 3 years ago, when I got in over my head with some gambling debts. I was going to pay it back, I swear. But then the debts got bigger, and I needed the money to keep up appearances at the firm." Mom sank onto the couch as if her legs could no longer support her weight. "Gambling debts? Jason, what are you talking about?" "Poker games with clients," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "High-stakes games where deals get made and careers get built. I thought I could win enough to pay everyone back and still come out ahead. But I kept losing, and the people I owed money to weren't the kind you could negotiate payment plans with." I felt like I was watching a stranger confess to crimes I couldn't have imagined. This was my brother, the one who'd graduated summa cum laude from law school, who'd given the valedictorian speech at his high school graduation, who'd been held up as the family success story for as long as I could remember. "How much do you owe?" I asked, dreading the answer. Jason's laugh was bitter and hollow. $67,000. And that's after using your money to keep them from breaking my legs for the past 3 years. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an expensive clock on the mantel and the distant sound of traffic far below. My mother was crying now, soft sobs that broke my heart more than Jason's confession. "You let me believe I was the family disappointment," I said slowly, pieces of a puzzle I'd never known existed finally clicking into place. "You sat there every Sunday while Mom and Dad compared my freelance work to your big-shot lawyer career, knowing the whole time that you were stealing from me to finance your gambling addiction." "I never meant for it to go this far," Jason pleaded. "I kept thinking I'd hit it big and be able to pay everyone back with interest. I thought I could fix everything without anyone ever knowing." I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there were my parents, probably sitting in their modest kitchen trying to figure out how they were going to save their house. Meanwhile, their perfect son had been living a lie that was about to destroy all of us. "You're going to fix this," I said without turning around. "You're going to pay back every penny you stole from our family, and you're going to get help for your gambling problem." "With what money?" Jason laughed bitterly. "They'll fire me if they find out about the gambling. My career will be over." "Then you should have thought of that before you decided to steal from your own family," I replied, finally turning to face him. "Because the alternative is that I call the police right now and have you arrested for fraud and theft." The ride back to my parents' house passed in uncomfortable silence. Mom stared out the passenger window at the suburban streets we'd driven down thousands of times throughout my childhood, while I tried to process everything we'd just learned. The brother I'd looked up to and secretly envied for years had been living a complete lie, funded by money he'd stolen from me. When we pulled into the driveway, Dad was sitting on the front porch, swing still wearing the same button-down shirt and khaki pants he'd worn to dinner. The porch light cast long shadows across his face, making him look older than his 62 years. "Well," he asked as we climbed the steps. "Jason confessed," Mom said simply, her voice hoarse from crying. "He's been taking Brantley's money to pay off gambling debts." Dad's shoulders sagged as if the weight of the world had just settled on them. I was afraid of something like this. There have been signs for years, but I kept telling myself I was imagining things. "What kind of signs?" I asked, settling into the wicker chair beside him. "Phone calls at odd hours that he'd take in private," Dad explained. "Mood swings that didn't make sense. Times when he'd be flush with cash, followed by periods where he seemed stressed about money. Your mother and I convinced ourselves it was just the pressure of his job." Mom sat down heavily on the porch swing beside Dad, the chains creaking softly under their combined weight. "There's something else you need to know, Brantley. Something we should have told you years ago." The tone in her voice made my stomach clench with dread. After everything we'd discovered tonight, I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations. "Jason's law school tuition." Dad began slowly. "We didn't just help him with it. We paid for all of it. The entire $200,000 came from a second mortgage on this house." The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000, but I thought he had scholarships. "He did partial ones," Mom explained, "but they only covered about 40% of his expenses. We told ourselves it was an investment in his future, that he'd be able to help us out once he was established in his career. That's why we never asked you for financial help," Dad added. "We knew you were just starting your business, and we didn't want to burden you with our problems. We figured Jason would be making enough money as a lawyer to help us catch up on the mortgage payments." I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole where nothing made sense anymore. "So, you've been struggling financially for years while I was sending money that never reached you, and Jason was using that money to fund his gambling addiction instead of helping you like he promised." "It gets worse," Mom whispered. "Last year, when Jason said he was helping with our bills, we thought things were finally turning around. We even went on that weekend trip to Gatlinburg, remember? We told you Jason had surprised us with it as an anniversary gift." The memory came flooding back. I'd felt a pang of jealousy when they'd shown me pictures from their trip, wishing I could afford to do something that generous for them. Now I realized they'd been celebrating with money that was rightfully theirs, anyway filtered through Jason's lies and theft. "There's more you don't know about Jason," Dad continued, his voice heavy with guilt. "This isn't his first problem with gambling. When he was in law school, he got into trouble with some online poker sites. We had to bail him out then, too, another $15,000 that we borrowed against the house." "Why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" I asked, feeling betrayed by my parents' secrecy as much as by Jason's theft. "Because we were ashamed," Mom admitted. "We'd spent your entire childhood holding Jason up as the perfect son, the one who had his life together. How could we admit that our golden boy was actually the one causing all our problems?" Dad reached over and patted my knee with a weathered hand. "We also didn't want to burden you with our mistakes. You were working so hard to build your business, and we knew money was tight for you too. We thought we could handle everything ourselves." The irony was almost too bitter to swallow. They'd been protecting me from their financial problems while I'd been secretly trying to help them solve those same problems, and Jason had been undermining both efforts for his own selfish purposes. "What exactly is the situation with the house?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know the full scope of the damage. Dad pulled out a stack of papers he'd apparently been reviewing while we were gone. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage payments and the bank has started foreclosure proceedings. We owe $18,000 in back payments plus penalties and fees. The second mortgage for Jason's education has a balloon payment due in 6 months, Mom added. $65,000 that we definitely don't have. I did quick math in my head. Between the back mortgage payments, the balloon payment, and the money Jason owed his creditors, we were looking at over $150,000 in debt that needed to be addressed immediately. There's something else, I said slowly, an idea beginning to form in my mind. Something about my business that you don't know. Both parents looked at me with expressions of curiosity mixed with concern. Throughout our entire family crisis, they still had no idea that their supposedly struggling younger son might actually be in a position to help solve their problems. "What about your business, honey?" Mom asked gently. I took a deep breath, preparing to share the secret I'd been keeping for over 2 years. It's not exactly the small freelance operation you think it is. The next morning, I picked up my parents at 9 o'clock sharp, just as I'd promised. They were both dressed in their Sunday best despite it being a Tuesday because I'd told them we were going somewhere important. Dad wore his navy blazer with the small moth hole near the left pocket that Mom had been meaning to fix for months, while she wore the blue dress she typically reserved for church and special occasions. "Are you going to tell us where we're going?" Mom asked as we drove through downtown Columbus, passing the familiar landmarks of my childhood. "You'll see in about 10 minutes. I replied, taking the exit toward the short North District. We pulled into the parking lot of a modern 3-story brick building with large windows and clean architectural lines. A discreet sign near the entrance read, "Montgomery Creative Solutions" in brushed steel letters. "Montgomery," Dad said slowly. "That's the name on the bank account that was receiving your payments." "Not just any Montgomery," I said, leading them toward the entrance. "J. Montgomery. Jason Montgomery." He used his middle initial to set up the fraudulent account, probably thinking it would be harder to trace back to him if anyone ever investigated. The reception area featured polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and carefully curated artwork from local artists. Behind a sleek desk sat Rebecca, my office manager, who looked up with a professional smile as we entered. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery," she said warmly. "Your parents—" "Mom, Dad. This is Rebecca Chen. She keeps this entire operation running smoothly. Rebecca, these are my parents, Richard and Patricia Montgomery." Rebecca stood and shook their hands gracefully. "It's wonderful to finally meet you. Brantley talks about you both constantly. Would you like some coffee while he shows you around?" The tour began in our main workspace, a large open area where 12 employees sat at individual workstations equipped with high-end computers and graphics tablets. The energy in the room was focused but relaxed, with people collaborating on projects while soft music played in the background. "This is our design team," I explained as we walked between the workstations. "We handle everything from logo design and branding packages for small businesses to major advertising campaigns for Fortune 500 companies." Sarah, one of our senior designers, looked up from her computer screen where she was working on a vibrant poster design. "Good morning, boss. The Campbell Soup people loved the new packaging concepts. They want to move forward with the full rebrand." My mother's eyes widened as she processed the implications. Campbell Soup. As in the Campbell's Soup Company. "One of our smaller clients, actually," I said, guiding them toward the conference room. "We're also handling the complete digital presence overhaul for 3 tech startups that are going public next year." The conference room walls were covered with framed examples of our work: magazine advertisements, website designs, corporate logos, and product packaging that they'd probably seen on store shelves without ever connecting them to my company. "Brantley," Dad said slowly, studying a poster campaign we'd created for a national restaurant chain. "How long has this company existed?" "5. I started it 5 years ago with a $5,000 loan from my savings account," I explained. "For the first 2 years, it really was just me working from my apartment. But we've grown pretty quickly since then." Tommy, my business development manager, knocked on the conference room door and peeked his head inside. Sorry to interrupt, but the lawyers from Peterson Industries are here for the contract signing. Should I tell them you'll be another few minutes? Shah. Give us 10 more minutes, then show them to conference room B, I replied. And make sure they have the updated term sheet that includes the digital marketing extension. After Tommy left, Mom turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was a mixture of pride, confusion, and something that might have been regret. How much money does this company make? She asked quietly. I'd been dreading this question, knowing that the answer would change everything between us. Last year, we had gross revenues of $2.4 million. After expenses and taxes, the company netted about $800,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs while Mom stared out the window at the city skyline. $800,000, she repeated slowly. That's more than your father and I made combined in the best year we ever had. Why didn't you tell us? Dad asked, his voice carrying a note of hurt that cut straight to my heart. I'd prepared for this question, but actually answering it was harder than I'd expected. Because every time I tried to share good news about my business, you'd change the subject to talk about Jason's latest accomplishment. Remember when I landed my first $20,000 client, you spent 5 minutes congratulating me, then spent an hour talking about Jason's promotion to junior associate. That's not fair, Mom protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our family text messages from the past year. Here's me telling you about signing a client that would pay us $50,000 for a 6-month campaign. Your response was, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Jason made partner track at his firm?" Here's another one where I mentioned we were hiring our 10th employee. You replied with a photo of Jason at some legal conference. The weight of their favoritism hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning for years. I'd gotten used to being the disappointing son who chose an unstable creative career over something respectable and predictable. But now they were seeing the reality behind their assumptions. I kept the business success quiet because I didn't want you to feel guilty about supporting Jason instead of asking me for help. I continued. I thought I could quietly send you money without you knowing it came from me, so you could keep your pride intact. And instead, Jason stole everything, Dad said bitterly. Everything except this, I said, gesturing around the conference room. The business is solid, profitable, and growing. We've got contracts worth over $1.2 million already signed for next year. Rebecca knocked on the door and entered with a folder of papers. I'm sorry to interrupt again, but you needed to review these contracts before the 2 o'clock meeting. As she handed me the folder, Mom asked, how many people work here? 12 full-time employees plus 4 contractors who work on specific projects, I replied, flipping through the contract pages. We're actually looking to hire 3 more people in the next few months. And you're the owner of all this? Dad asked, his voice filled with wonder and something that might have been pride. Majority owner, yes. Sarah and Tommy both have small equity stakes as part of their compensation packages. The Peterson Industries meeting went smoothly, resulting in a signed contract for a $120,000 branding project that would keep 3 of our designers busy for the next 4 months. When I returned to the conference room, my parents were studying the framed awards on the walls. Business Excellence Award from the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. Mom read aloud. Innovation in Digital Marketing from the Ohio Small Business Association. Outstanding Community Impact from the United Way. The Community Impact Award was for the pro bono work we do, I explained. Every year we donate about $60,000 worth of design services to local nonprofits and charities. Dad turned away from the wall and looked at me with an expression I'd been waiting my whole life to see. It was the same look he'd always reserved for Jason. Pride, respect, and genuine admiration. Son, I owe you an apology that's about 28 years overdue. The family meeting I'd called for the following Sunday felt different from every other gathering we'd had in my parents' dining room. For the first time in my memory, I was the one leading the conversation instead of sitting quietly while everyone else made decisions. Jason arrived 20 minutes late, which was uncharacteristic for someone who'd built his reputation on punctuality and professionalism. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping. When he sat down at the table, his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the glass of water Mom had set out for him. "Before we start," Jason said, his voice hoarse, "I want you all to know that I've been meeting with a counselor about my gambling problem. I'm committed to getting clean." "That's a good first step," I replied, setting a manila folder on the table between us. "But we need to talk about the practical realities of what you've done and how we're going to fix it." I opened the folder and spread out the financial documents I'd spent the week compiling. "According to my calculations, you owe our family $28,800 in stolen payments. You also owe $67,000 to various creditors related to your gambling debts. That's a total of $95,800. Jason's face went even paler as he stared at the numbers in black and white. "I don't have that kind of money, Brantley. If I did, do you think I would have stolen from you in the first place?" "I'm aware of that," I continued, "which is why I've developed a repayment plan that we're all going to agree to today, or I'm calling the police tomorrow morning." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Mom reached across the table and squeezed Dad's hand while Jason looked like he might be sick. "What kind of repayment plan?" Dad asked carefully. "Jason is going to immediately resign from his law firm and find a job that doesn't put him in proximity to gambling opportunities," I explained. "He's going to sell his expensive apartment and move back home with you for the next 5 years. Every penny he earns above basic living expenses will go toward repaying his debts." "That's impossible," Jason protested. "If I resign from the firm, my career in law is over. No one will hire a lawyer who quit under mysterious circumstances." "Then maybe you should have considered that before you decided to steal from your own family," I shot back. "Besides, your career in law was probably over anyway once your gambling debts caught up with you. At least this way you have a chance to rebuild your life honestly." Jason stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "You can't just destroy my entire future because of one mistake. Fumari Diaz." "One mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You stole from me for 3 years. You let our parents struggle financially while you lived in luxury with my money. You've been lying to everyone who cares about you for years. This isn't one mistake, Jason. This is a pattern of selfish, destructive behavior that ends today." "What if I refuse?" Jason asked, his jaw set with the stubbornness I remembered from our childhood arguments. "Then I called Detective Martinez at the Columbus Police Department's White-Collar Crime Division," I replied, pulling a business card from my pocket. "I've already spoken with her about the case. She says that with the banking records and your confession, they could have you arrested for felony theft within 24 hours. The fight seemed to go out of Jason all at once. He collapsed back into his chair and buried his face in his hands. "You don't understand the kind of people I owe money to, Brantley. They're not going to wait 5 years for me to pay them back through minimum wage jobs." "I've thought of that too," I said, producing another document from the folder. "I'm prepared to pay off your gambling debts immediately, but only under very specific conditions." Jason looked up with desperate hope in his eyes. "What conditions?" "You resign from the firm this week and enter a residential gambling addiction treatment program for 90 days. When you complete the program, you move back home and take whatever legitimate job you can find. You don't touch cards, dice, or any form of gambling for the rest of your life, and you pay back every penny you've cost this family plus interest." "How long do I have to pay it back?" Jason asked quietly. 7 years, I replied, at 6% interest that works out to about $1,500 a month. If you're living at home and working full-time, that should be manageable. Jason did quick math in his head. That's over $126,000 total. "Consider it a lesson in compound interest," I said coldly. "Something you might have learned if you'd put as much energy into legitimate investments as you did into poker games." Mom had been quiet throughout this entire exchange, but now she spoke up. "What happens if he agrees to all this but then relapses? What if he starts gambling again?" Then the deal is void, and I press charges immediately, I replied. No second chances, no excuses, no family loyalty. He gets one opportunity to make this right, and if he blows it, he's on his own. Jason was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he realized the full scope of what his choices had cost him. I never wanted any of this to happen. I thought I could fix everything without anyone getting hurt. But you didn't fix anything, Dad said firmly. You made everything worse for everyone who loves you. The question now is whether you're man enough to take responsibility for what you've done. For a moment, I thought Jason might refuse the deal and storm out of the house. He sat there staring at the documents, probably calculating whether he had any other options. Finally, he reached for the pen I'd placed beside the papers. I'll sign, he whispered, but I need you to know that this is going to destroy my relationship with everyone at the firm. My professional reputation will be ruined. Good, I said without a trace of sympathy. Maybe that will help you remember why honesty matters the next time you're tempted to take shortcuts. As Jason signed the agreement, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. It's one of the people I owe money to, he said, his voice barely audible. Don't answer it, I instructed. From now on, all communication with your creditors goes through me. You're done making decisions about money. But Jason had already answered the phone, apparently unable to break the habit of trying to manage the situation himself. We could only hear his side of the conversation, but his increasingly panicked responses made it clear that whoever was calling wasn't interested in patient repayment plans. Please, I just need a few more days, Jason pleaded into the phone. I'm getting the money together, I promise. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Jason growing more agitated with each exchange. Finally, he hung up and turned to us with terror in his eyes. They want $50,000 by Friday or they're going to take it out of my hide, he said, his voice shaking. They know where I work, where I live, where you live. The implication of that last statement hit all of us simultaneously. Jason's problems had just become our problems, whether we wanted them to or not. That's it, I said, standing up and pulling out my own phone. I'm calling the police right now. This has gone beyond family dysfunction into actual criminal activity. No, please. Jason jumped up and grabbed my arm. If you involve the police, these people will know I talked. They'll hurt all of us just to make a point. Then what do you suggest? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. I need the $50,000 by Friday, Jason said quietly. After that, I'll do whatever you want. I'll sign any agreement, move home, get treatment, whatever. But right now, I need you to save my life. Mom was crying now, quiet sobs that broke my heart. Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him, the weight of Jason's choices pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. If I give you the money, I said slowly, how do I know you won't just disappear? How do I know this isn't just another manipulation to get out of taking responsibility for what you've done? Jason looked me straight in the eye for the first time in weeks. Because I'm finally ready to admit that I can't fix this by myself. I need help, and I need my family, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I studied his face, looking for any sign of the deception and manipulation that had characterized his behavior for years. Instead, I saw genuine fear, genuine remorse, and something that might have been genuine hope for redemption. Friday is 3 days away, I said finally. That gives us just enough time to set up a wire transfer and make sure everything is documented properly. But Jason, I want you to understand something very clearly. This is the last time I'm bailing you out of anything. If you screw this up, you're completely on your own. Wednesday evening found me in the most surreal situation of my adult life, sitting in a downtown Columbus coffee shop across from a man who looked like he should have been selling insurance, not collecting gambling debts. Marcus Williams wore a polo shirt and khakis, drove a Honda Accord, and could have been anyone's suburban dad. The only indication of his true profession was the expensive watch on his wrist and the cold calculation in his eyes when he talked about money. Your brother owes my associates a considerable amount of money. Marcus said calmly, stirring sugar into his coffee. The fact that he's managed to avoid serious consequences for this long shows remarkable patience on our part. I'd insisted on meeting Jason's primary creditor face to face before transferring any money, partly to ensure the debt was legitimate, and partly to establish that Jason's family was now involved in resolving the situation. What I'd discovered was more troubling than I'd expected. $67,000 is the total amount, I confirmed, reviewing the documentation Marcus had provided. Plus $15,000 in interest and fees that have accrued over the past 6 months, Marcus added. Your brother has been very creative in finding excuses for why he couldn't pay, but our patience isn't infinite. The additional $15,000 was a punch to the gut I hadn't seen coming. Jason told me the total was $67,000. Perhaps he was hoping to find the additional $15,000 elsewhere, Marcus suggested with a thin smile. Or perhaps he was planning to default on that portion and face the consequences. Either way, $82,000 is the current balance due. I pulled out my phone and called Jason, putting the phone on speaker so Marcus could hear both sides of the conversation. Where's the extra $15,000 coming from? I asked without preamble when Jason answered. What extra $15,000? Jason's voice sounded confused and panicked. The interest and fees you forgot to mention, I said coldly. The total debt is $82,000, not $67,000. The silence that followed stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, Jason's voice came through the phone, barely above a whisper. I thought I could figure out a way to cover that part separately. By stealing from someone else, I demanded. By lying to another family member, by selling something that doesn't belong to you. I don't know, Jason shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. I don't know how I was going to get the extra money. I just hoped something would work out. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly piqued by Jason's emotional breakdown. Mr. Montgomery, perhaps you should know that your brother has been exploring some very desperate options for raising additional funds. What kind of options? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. He approached several of our competitors about borrowing money to pay us back, Marcus explained. When that didn't work, he started talking about taking out loans against your parents' house. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, loans against their house? He had been researching reverse mortgages and home equity loans, Marcus said. Apparently, he had some plan to forge your parents' signatures on loan documents. The phone in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Jason, is that true? I was just researching options, Jason protested. I wasn't actually going to do anything without talking to them first. Bullshit, I said flatly. You've been lying and stealing for 3 years. Why would you suddenly develop a conscience about forging loan documents? Marcus cleared his throat politely. Mr. Montgomery, we need this matter resolved by Friday evening. If the full $82,000 isn't transferred by 6 p.m., we'll be forced to pursue alternative collection methods. The threat was delivered in the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather, which somehow made it even more menacing. I understood now why Jason had been so terrified during Sunday's family meeting. You'll have your money, I assured Marcus, ending the call with Jason without saying goodbye. After Marcus left the coffee shop, I sat alone for another hour trying to process everything I'd learned. My brother hadn't just stolen money and gambled it away. He'd been planning to drag our parents into his criminal activities by forging their signatures on fraudulent loan documents. The depth of his betrayal seemed to have no bottom. Thursday morning, I drove to my parents' house with a manila folder full of legal documents and a heart heavy with the knowledge that our family would never be the same. I found them in the kitchen sharing coffee and toast while working on a crossword puzzle together. We need to talk, I said, setting the folder on the kitchen table between their coffee cups. Is this about the extra $15,000? Dad asked. Jason called us last night crying and apologizing. He told us about the interest and fees. It's about more than that, I replied, opening the folder to reveal the loan applications Marcus had mentioned. Jason has been researching ways to take out loans against your house without your knowledge. Mom's coffee cup clattered against the saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. What do you mean? I spread the documents across the table, reverse mortgage applications with forged signatures, home equity loan paperwork that had been partially completed, and printed emails between Jason and various financial institutions. I had a private investigator pull these from Jason's computer after yesterday's meeting, I explained. He's been planning this for months. If I hadn't discovered the original theft, he probably would have forged your signatures and borrowed against your house to pay off his gambling debts. Dad studied the documents with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 40 years reviewing contracts and legal paperwork. These signatures look exactly like ours, he said quietly. How is that possible? Practice, I replied grimly. There are dozens of practice sheets in his apartment where he's been perfecting your signatures. The private investigator found them yesterday. Mom stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the backyard where Jason and I had played as children. How did we raise someone capable of this kind of deception? You didn't, I said firmly. You raised two sons the best way you knew how. One of them made good choices, and one of them made terrible choices. That's not a reflection on your parenting. But we enabled him, Dad said, his voice heavy with guilt. We paid for his education, bailed him out of his first gambling problem, and spent years making excuses for his behavior. Maybe if we'd held him accountable earlier, this never would have happened. Maybe, I acknowledged, but you can't change the past. You can only decide what you're going to do going forward. Mom returned to the table and sat down heavily. What are our options? I'm going to pay off his gambling debts tomorrow to keep all of us safe, I said. But after that, Jason is completely cut off from any family financial support. He's going to have to rebuild his life from the ground up, and he's going to have to do it honestly. What about his job at the law firm? Dad asked. He resigned yesterday afternoon, I replied. I made it clear that staying in an environment where he had access to client money and high-stakes social events wasn't an option. So he's unemployed, in debt, and has no prospects, Mom summarized. What's to stop him from just running away and starting over somewhere else? I pulled out another document from the folder. This is a contract I've prepared with the help of my business attorney. It legally binds Jason to the repayment plan we discussed on Sunday with specific penalties for default. If he tries to run away or starts gambling again, I can pursue criminal charges and civil remedies. And if he honors the agreement, Dad asked. Then in 7 years, he'll have paid back every penny he owes, completed addiction treatment, and hopefully learned how to live an honest life, I replied. It's not going to be easy for any of us, but it's the only way I can see to preserve what's left of our family. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. What about you, honey? How do you feel about all this? Honestly, I took a deep breath before answering. I'm angry, hurt, and disappointed. But I'm also hopeful that Jason can change if he's finally forced to face the consequences of his actions. And I'm grateful that I'm in a position to help solve this problem without destroying everyone's lives. We're proud of you, Dad said simply, for building your business, for taking care of us even when we didn't know we needed taking care of, and for handling this situation with more maturity and grace than we probably deserved. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and Jason's voice calling out, Mom, Dad, are you home? When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, he looked even worse than he had on Sunday. His clothes were rumpled, his hair unwashed, and there was a desperate quality to his movements that suggested he might be close to a complete breakdown. I need to tell you something, Jason said, his voice shaking. Something I should have told you years ago. What now? I asked, not sure I could handle any more revelations. Jason sat down at the table and buried his face in his hands. The gambling addiction didn't start in law school. It started in high school when I was betting on football games with some seniors. You paid for my first semester of college with money I'd lost and couldn't repay. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Another layer of deception, another betrayal of trust, another secret that had shaped our family dynamics for over a decade. How much? Dad asked quietly. $8,000, Jason whispered. I told you I needed it for textbooks and dorm supplies, but really I needed it to pay off the seniors before they beat me up." Mom started crying again, quiet tears that spoke to years of accumulated disappointment and worry. "Jason, how many other lies have you told us over the years?" "I don't know," Jason admitted. "So many that I can't even remember them all. I've been lying to you, to myself, and to everyone else for so long that I don't even know who I really am anymore." I looked at my brother, this stranger who shared my DNA and my childhood memories, and felt something shift inside my chest. The anger was still there, along with the hurt and disappointment. But underneath all of that was something I hadn't expected to feel: pity. "Tomorrow, after I transfer the money to pay off your debts, you're checking into the treatment facility I found," I said. "It's a 90-day program specifically designed for gambling addiction. When you complete the program, we'll talk about what comes next." "And if I don't complete the program?" Jason asked. "Then you're on your own," I replied. "No family support, no financial help, and no more chances. This is it, Jason. This is your last opportunity to salvage your life and your relationship with us." Jason nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I know trust has to be earned back, but I want you to know that I'm grateful you're giving me this chance." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "Thank me in 7 years when you've paid back every penny and proven that you can live an honest life. Until then, gratitude is just another word." 2 years and 4 months later, I stood in the parking lot of the Riverside Recovery Center, waiting for Jason to emerge from the building that had been his home for the past 90 days. It was his second stint in treatment. The first one had ended after 67 days when he'd been caught using his phone to check sports betting websites. That relapse had cost him an additional $10,000 in penalties according to our family contract, and it had cost him the last remnants of trust from our parents. This time felt different, though. During our weekly phone calls over the past 3 months, Jason had sounded more grounded, more honest about his struggles, and more committed to the long-term work of recovery. His counselor, Dr. Patricia Stevens, had warned us that gambling addiction was a lifelong battle, but she'd also expressed cautious optimism about Jason's progress. The front doors of the facility opened and Jason walked out carrying a single duffel bag and wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt that were a far cry from the expensive suits he'd once favored. He looked healthier than I'd seen him in years. His face had filled out slightly. His posture was straighter, and his eyes carried a clarity that had been missing for as long as I could remember. "Ready to go home?" I asked as he approached the car. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, though I could hear the nervousness in his voice. The drive back to Columbus gave us time to talk about the practical realities of his new life. In the 27 months since our family crisis had exploded, Jason had been working steadily to rebuild his existence from the ground up. After completing his first treatment program, he'd taken a job at a local warehouse, earning $12 an hour loading trucks and doing inventory management. "I got promoted to shift supervisor last month," Jason said as we drove through the familiar neighborhoods of our childhood. "It comes with a $2 raise and health insurance benefits." "That's great," I replied, and I meant it. For someone who'd once earned a 6-figure salary as a lawyer, celebrating a promotion to $14 an hour represented a complete transformation in values and priorities. "I know it doesn't sound like much," Jason continued, "but it's honest work, and my supervisor says I'm one of the most reliable employees they've ever had. Turns out that when you're not staying up all night gambling, you can actually show up to work on time." We pulled into our parents' driveway where Mom and Dad were waiting on the front porch. They'd aged noticeably over the past 2 years, but their financial situation had stabilized significantly. I'd paid off their mortgage entirely as a Christmas gift the previous year, and Dad had taken a part-time job at the local hardware store that he genuinely enjoyed. "Welcome home, son," Dad said, embracing Jason with the careful affection of someone who'd learned to love with boundaries. "Thanks, Dad," Jason replied. "It feels good to be back." The next few hours were spent settling Jason back into his old bedroom, which Mom had kept exactly as he'd left it in high school. We'd all agreed that returning to familiar surroundings might help him stay grounded during the difficult transition period ahead. "I've been thinking about your repayment schedule," I said as we sat around the kitchen table after dinner. "You've been making your monthly payments consistently for over 2 years now. That shows real commitment to keeping your word." Jason had been sending me $1,500 every month like clockwork, even when it meant eating ramen noodles and riding the bus to work because he couldn't afford car repairs. So far, he'd paid back $41,000 of the $126,000 he owed with no missed or late payments. "I was wondering," Jason said hesitantly, "if there might be a way to increase my payments now that I've got the promotion and the insurance benefits. I'd like to get this debt paid off as quickly as possible." The request surprised me. Most people in his situation would have been looking for ways to reduce their payments, not increase them. "Why the hurry?" I asked. "Because every month that I owe you money is another month that I'm reminded of the damage I caused," Jason explained. "I want to reach a point where I can look you in the eye and know that I've made things right." "There's something else we need to discuss," Mom said, glancing at Dad before continuing. "We've been talking, and we think it's time for Jason to start building his own life again. Living at home has been helpful during his recovery, but he's 31 years old and he needs to develop independence." I looked at Jason to gauge his reaction. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," he admitted with a laugh, "but also excited. I've been looking at some apartments near work, nothing fancy but places where I could afford the rent and still make my payments to you." "Actually, I have a different suggestion," I said, pulling out a folder I'd brought with me. "Montgomery Creative Solutions is expanding into a second location, and I need someone to manage the day-to-day operations. It would mean going back to school part-time to get certified in business management, but the job would come with a salary that could support independent living and accelerated debt repayment." The offer hung in the air while Jason processed what I was suggesting. "You want to hire me after everything I've done?" "I want to hire the person you've become," I clarified. "Someone who's learned the value of honest work, who understands the importance of keeping commitments, and who's proven he can be trusted with responsibility. The question is whether you're interested in that kind of challenge." Jason's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in years they seemed to be tears of hope rather than despair. "I'd be honored to work for you, but I need you to know that I'll never take advantage of our family relationship. If I don't perform up to your standards, you fire me without hesitation." "Deal," I said, extending my hand across the table. "But I should warn you that I'm a demanding boss. I expect excellence from everyone on my team." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Jason replied, shaking my hand firmly. Over the following months, Jason threw himself into his new role with the same intensity he'd once brought to gambling. He enrolled in evening business classes at the local community college, worked 50-hour weeks learning every aspect of our operations, and continued to make his debt payments without fail. The transformation wasn't always smooth. There were moments when he struggled with the impulse to gamble, particularly during stressful periods at work or school. But he'd learned to reach out for help when those moments arose, calling his sponsor from Gamblers Anonymous or talking through his feelings with Dr. Stevens during their continued counseling sessions. One evening, about 8 months after he'd started working for the company, Jason knocked on the door of my office after everyone else had gone home. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked. "There's something I need to tell you." I looked up from the financial reports I'd been reviewing, noting the serious expression on his face. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I've been offered a job," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Stevens and Associates, the accounting firm downtown. They need someone to manage their client services department." My first instinct was to feel disappointed that he was considering leaving, but I forced myself to focus on what this opportunity meant for his continued growth and recovery. "That's fantastic," I said. "What kind of salary are they offering?" $68,000 a year plus benefits and performance bonuses, Jason replied. "It's more than double what I'm making here." "Then you should take it," I said without hesitation. This was always meant to be a stepping stone, not a permanent arrangement. The goal was to help you rebuild your life and career, and it sounds like that's exactly what's happening. But I haven't finished paying you back yet, Jason protested. I still owe you almost $50,000. I pulled out a calculator and did some quick math. At your current payment rate, you've got about 2.5 years left. With the higher salary, you could probably accelerate that to 18 months if you wanted to. Actually, I was thinking more like 12 months, Jason said with a smile. I've been living pretty frugally, and I don't see any reason to change that just because I'm making more money. I'd rather get my debt paid off and start building a real savings account. 6 months later, Jason made his final payment. We met at the same coffee shop where I'd once sat across from Marcus Williams, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory rather than threatening. Jason handed me a cashier's check for the remaining balance, along with a handwritten letter. I know I can never fully make up for the pain and betrayal I caused. The letter read, but I hope that proving I can keep my word is at least a start. You saved my life by giving me the chance to make things right, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. Today, 3 years after that final payment, Jason is the regional manager for Stevens & Associates, overseeing client services for their offices in Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. He's been promoted twice, owns a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, and has been dating the same woman for over 18 months. More importantly, he's maintained his sobriety from gambling and has become a mentor for other people struggling with addiction. Our parents are thriving as well. Dad retired from the hardware store last year and has taken up woodworking as a hobby, creating beautiful furniture pieces that he gifts to family and friends. Mom volunteers at the local literacy center and has discovered a talent for teaching adults to read. Their house is paid off, their retirement accounts are healthy, and they've learned to treat both of their sons with equal respect and affection. As for me, Montgomery Creative Solutions now employs 37 people across 2 locations, and we've expanded our services to include digital marketing and web development. Last year, we were recognized as one of the fastest-growing small businesses in Ohio, and I've been invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and business development. But the real measure of our family's recovery isn't found in financial success or professional achievements. It's found in the fact that we can sit around my parents' dining table on Sunday afternoons and have honest conversations about our lives, our struggles, and our hopes for the future. Jason no longer lives in the shadow of lies and deception. Our parents no longer have to choose between their children, and I no longer have to hide my success or carry the burden of everyone else's problems. The journey wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wondered if our family would survive the revelations and recriminations that followed Jason's confession. But we learned that real love isn't about enabling destructive behavior or pretending problems don't exist. Real love is about holding each other accountable while still offering hope for redemption. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop rescuing them from the consequences of their choices, and instead give them the opportunity to rescue themselves. Jason had to lose everything: his career, his apartment, his reputation, his family's trust, before he could find the motivation to build something better in its place. Today, when people ask me about the secret to turning around a failing relationship or rebuilding trust after betrayal, I tell them the truth. There are no shortcuts, no quick fixes, and no guarantees. But if all parties are willing to do the hard work of honest communication, genuine accountability, and patient rebuilding, it's possible to create something stronger and more authentic than what existed before. The story of my family's crisis and recovery has taught me that people can change, but only when they're truly ready to face the consequences of their actions and do the difficult work of transformation. It's also taught me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to prove they're capable of being better than they've shown themselves to be. I think about that lesson often in my business, dealings, my friendships, and my relationships with family members. We all make mistakes, we all have moments of weakness, and we all need the grace of second chances. But grace without accountability isn't really grace at all. It's enablement that ultimately prevents people from growing into the best versions of themselves. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between family loyalty and holding someone accountable for their actions? How did you navigate that difficult balance between love and tough love? Share your stories in the comments below, and let's support each other through the complexities of family relationships. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and rebuilding relationships. And don't forget to share this with someone who might benefit from hearing about the power of accountability, redemption, and second chances. Thank you for listening, and remember that no matter how broken a situation might seem, there's always hope for healing when people are willing to do the hard work of making things right. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love.